The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Order! Order! We come first to the business of the House today motion. I call the Minister to move the motion, or the whip on duty to move the motion. Thank you. The question is the business of the House today motion as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Just before we get underway with the debate, I would like to ask the House to join me in thanking extremely warmly Graham Cowie and Vaughan Miller, brilliant members of staff in the library, for producing under extreme pressure of time a comprehensive and informative brief for this debate, not least in response to the representations of colleagues yesterday afternoon. They're wonderful servants of the House, and we say thank you to them. Order. We now come to the motion on the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union. I inform the House that I have not selected amendments. I remind the House that under the terms of the business motion just agreed to, the debate may continue until 2:30 p.m, at which time the questions will be put. There we go. To open the debate, I call the Attorney General, Mr. Geoffrey Cox.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I first begin by thanking all members of the House for coming on Friday and apologising for the fact that we have had to convene today. But, Mr. Speaker, the reasons why we are convening today are partly to be found in the fact that today is the 29th of March, and it was today, Mr. Speaker, which this House voted some months and years ago should have been the day on which we left the European Union. However, we are today where we are, precisely. And I do not intend to review how and why we have arrived at this point, but to explain, Mr. Speaker, the motion which the government is placing before the House. On the 21st of March of this year, the Council agreed a decision. If the withdrawal agreement is approved, then we have a legal right as a country to an extension to the 22nd of May 2019. If not, if this withdrawal agreement is not approved, then that extension will expire on the 11th of April. Now that means, Mr. Speaker, that any other extension that this House might desire to be agreed by the Union would be at its discretion, subject to the veto of 27 leaders. Therefore, by this evening, if the 11 o'clock deadline expires and the agreement has not been approved, that legal right will expire with it. This is, I will in a minute, not now. This is therefore the last opportunity to take advantage of our legal right. And the government has taken the view, Mr. Speaker, that it would have been wrong to allow that time and date to expire without giving this House the opportunity to consider whether it should avail itself of the legal right or whether it should move into a position where any further extension will be at the discretion of the 27 leaders. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not taking interventions at the moment. I will in due course. I will in due course. I don't intend to be long, and I want to set out clearly the choice before the House today. The minimum necessary, therefore, the minimum necessary in order to secure this right that is ours as a matter of law is that the withdrawal agreement is approved. All negotiated exits from the European Union will require this withdrawal agreement to have been approved. The Union has made it abundantly clear, and the decision...
Point of order. I hope it's a genuine point of order. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Speaker, the attorney refused to accept my intervention. Mr. Speaker, but I believe he may be inadvertently misleading us, because he spoke very importantly about the date and the significance of today and the importance of the deadline this evening. However, I know, Mr. Speaker, that the government approached those of us working on the indicative votes process, asking us if we would reschedule our indicative votes business for today. So, if that is the case, Mr. Speaker, why is there this significance? And surely the attorney is therefore misleading us about the significance of holding the vote today.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, but it doesn't require adjudication by the Chair. The Attorney-General will have heard the point of order, and it is open to him to respond to it or not as he thinks fit. The Attorney-General.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will take interventions. I don't refuse it. I was just asking if he'd be patient. But let me deal with that point now. The government was considering asking that the indicative vote process continue this morning so that we could have brought a motion this afternoon or this evening. The question was, that's it. No, I won't. That's exactly what the thinking was. That's exactly what the thinking was. There is no desire by this government to interfere with the process that the House is currently undergoing. On the contrary, the motion acknowledges it and notes it, and I will come to it, if I may, in due course. Mr. Speaker, the minimum necessary to secure our legal right to an extension, therefore, is that this withdrawal agreement is approved. And all negotiated exits that any member of this House might conjecture or dream of will require this withdrawal agreement. Therefore, the House has before it a clear choice this morning. It can either approve this withdrawal agreement, knowing that by doing so it secures its right to an extension, or it can have declined to do so and know, in doing so, that by next week there will be no right to an extension, that any extension applied for will require some clear indication of the pathway forward and a stable majority behind it, and thirdly, that it is subject to the veto of those 27 member states. Now that brings me, Mr. Speaker, I will in due course, that brings me, Mr. Speaker, to the motion before the House. This motion sets out clearly that it is not a meaningful vote. Pursuant to Section 13(1)(b) of the Act, it is designed solely to give the opportunity to this House of taking advantage of the right that we have in international law. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it could not be a vote under Section 13(1) subsection 1, precisely because, Mr. Speaker, you have ruled, a ruling the government fully respects, that a meaningful vote cannot be brought back while it poses the same or substantially the same question to this House. Therefore, this motion has been designed to comply with your ruling, Mr. Speaker, and in complying with that ruling, it cannot comply with the requirements of Section 13 of the Withdrawal Act. Therefore, we put before the House the choice that the House faces today. What this choice will mean is that it will bring certainty to thousands of businesses and millions of individual citizens throughout this country, and to 1 million citizens of our country residing in the European Union. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is a not inconsiderable benefit. That certainty will be because, by taking the step of approving the withdrawal agreement today, it will set out a clear and certain pathway to our departure from the European Union. But let me come now to the political declaration. Now, I won't give way now, but I will give way to members in due course. I want to set out the choice before the House. As the motion acknowledges, the political declaration is open to change. The Union has accepted that it is open to negotiating change and that it will consent to discuss it. And so the House is undergoing a process at the moment of seeing whether a stable majority can be found for any political solution for the future. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the government respects that process. It acknowledges that it is continuing. It accepts, therefore, that further steps will be necessary to approve the political declaration in this House. This House will have to ratify not only the withdrawal agreement, but also the political declaration. And so the government will give consideration as to precisely how the full package will be approved with the political declaration. But one option for the House will be to introduce the EU withdrawal implementation bill, agreement bill, before this House. And if this agreement is approved today, the government will introduce the bill within the next few days. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to him for giving way. Does he agree with me that the motion today flatly contradicts the European Union withdrawal bill, which specifically provides that we are required to have the motion passed by both sides of both the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement in place before we comply with the Act?
As the motion notes, the honourable member will understand, it notes that it is not purporting to be a Section 13(1) vote. This is simply designed to afford the House the chance of taking advantage of the legal right established by the Council decision. It is not. It is not a vote under Section 13. There's nothing unlawful. There is certainly nothing procedurally improper about it. It is done to afford the House this chance. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Attorney General for giving way. I want to ask him about the consequences for any further extension of this motion passing today. Because if we get until the 22nd of May, but in the week leading up to that, it becomes clear that we have still not reached agreement on a political declaration. If we ask the EU for a further extension, are they not likely to say, I'm sorry, you can't have one because you did not take part in the European Parliament elections, and that therefore defeating this motion today will at least give us the chance to make that choice with an extension to the 12th of April, where we could get a longer extension. At the 12th of April, we could not get it if we go to the 22nd of May.
I understand the right honourable gentleman's point. I say straight away, the answer to that is this is the only right we have to an extension. If we move into next week without securing it, then we take the chance that of those 27 leaders, they will be vetoed. Now, the right honourable gentleman asks me about European parliamentary elections. Plainly, the stated position of the European Union is that we would have to organise and stand in those elections if we went beyond May the 23rd. Some lawyers, of course, disagree with that stated position and say that it would not be necessary, but that is the stated position of the Union. The point, however, I would say to the right honourable gentleman, is that we have the opportunity here to embrace certainty. What the right honourable gentleman's prescription? What the right honourable gentleman's prescription? No. What the right honourable gentleman's prescription would have us do is take a chance on the goodwill of the 27 member states of the European Union that they will grant us another extension. When, Mr. Speaker, this withdrawal agreement, everybody knows, the right honourable gentleman knows, is an essential prerequisite of our departure from the European Union. That may be why he doesn't want to vote for it. And the official Labour position, is that they do not disagree or object to a clause or article of the withdrawal agreement. I have to say, the country looking on must judge this. They do not object. They have not emitted a peep of disagreement with a single clause or article of that agreement, and their position today is that they intend to vote it down. What kind of cynicism is that, Mr. Speaker? So I say to the House, the opportunity now is for us to embrace the certain legal right for an extension to May the 22nd. That will give us the opportunity of giving certainty to the country and allowing for the process of reconsideration of the political declaration to take place.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable and learned friend, and I entirely agree with him that, of course, apart from the dates of the 12th of April and the 22nd of May, any other extension for a longer period would have to be agreed with the other 27 member states. But is it not the case that it was made quite clear when the Prime Minister was at the last European Union summit that an extension to the 22nd of May was what was described as a technical extension for the purpose of simply bringing about what had been agreed fully and completely in this House? And that therefore, if we extend to the 22nd of May without having reached that conclusion now, we do run the very serious risk that we will not be able to extend further at that date if we have not completed all the parts of both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. Whereas, if we were to go back now and ask for longer, it will be given to us if we wanted to consider other options.
Well, I have to say, I know that my right honourable friend is a very distinguished and able lawyer, but I never knew that he had a crystal ball. The fact of the matter is, the European Union has not agreed to grant any longer extension. It will be subject to the veto of any of the 27, and it would certainly be subject to clear signs in this House that there was a stable majority for an alternative solution and a stable way of delivering it. So now I must make progress, but I will give way particularly to the honourable gentleman. So I say to the House, the reason for the motion today, the reason for the form of the motion today, is that it enables the House to secure this legal right. It is the case that the government makes that this agreement is required in any event. The members on the other side do not dispute a requirement that it will be the requirement that there is for this agreement to be passed, and therefore we invite the House to secure the certainty of the extension, to continue with the process of the political declaration reconsiderations, to enable us by May the 22nd to have ratified the domestic implementing legislation and to have concluded discussions on the political declaration. I will give way first to the honourable gentleman and then to.
I'm grateful. The attorney's argument is basically that this is a way of guaranteeing certainty for business in the country. However, if today's motion is carried, there will be no certainty.
Correct.
The government will not be able to ratify the treaty, will it? Yep. I think he accepts that they won't be able to ratify. There will still have to be the proper motion brought forward to this House and the other, including both sides. There will still have to be a bill which will be much contentiously disputed. There is no certainty. If anything, today throws more uncertainty into the process.
There will certainly have to be the bill. There will have to be a process of ratification in this House, which is why, if the House votes for the withdrawal agreement today, it would be surprising if it didn't vote to implement the withdrawal agreement. And I would say this is the step that we need to take. May I just move on to the political declaration very briefly, if I may, to the right honourable gentleman.
To him. If we pass this motion today, and given we have business on Monday to continue to express our preferences, and if the Speaker was willing, would we not be able to bring forward a resolution which encaptured what we decide today, if it is to accept the divorce settlement, with, say, the motion that the Father of the House put to us to vote on this week, which came the nearest to being passed, that we would have the divorce settlement and other alternatives, including the customs union.
Plainly, that would be open to the House to do. The problem with it, I say to the right honourable gentleman, is that we would have lost the legal right to the extension. Therefore, we would be applying at the discretion of the Union to grant it to us. But let me come back, if I may, let me come back to the political declaration, because it's important I should say a few more words, if I may, about this. The process that is...
Mr. Speaker, I just wonder... I am seeking to catch the attention of the Attorney General. I just wondered whether he might have a loss of hearing or something.
And in my experience, the honourable gentleman is both noticeable and audible. The Attorney General.
Yes. So, the political... I will give way to the honourable gentleman in a moment, if I may, but let me just complete about the political declaration. The process is being undergone by the House at the moment. The government recognises that process and will in due course take decisions as to how and if and it can implement anything that might emerge from it. But the whole point of the political declaration is that it cannot be negotiated with the European Union now. And what the government is saying, and there were some amendments down, I think, by the honourable member for State Central, what the government is saying in connection with the next stage of the political declaration and its negotiation with the European Union is that there will be new mechanisms and new procedures so that this House can be properly consulted and have a particular role in the manner in which the political declaration, once it is finalised within this House, will be negotiated in that second stage. And I can say to the honourable member for State Central, if I may, I'll give way to him in a moment, that the government would have accepted the amendments that he proposed with others standing in his name.
I thank the Attorney General for giving way. The amendment that I put down with colleagues today was very clear. But any process for this House would have to be underpinned by legislation. It would have to form part of the withdrawal agreement implementation bill, and there would have to be a clear role for this House to agree the future relationship before it was signed off with the European Union. Is he able to give a confirmation from that dispatch box that if he brings forward the bill next week, those measures will be in clear text in that bill in black and white?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we would have accepted his amendments, clearly in terms of the detailed working out of those amendments, in discussion. No. If it requires, the honourable member will be able to bring forward an amendment. If it requires an amendment to that legislation, we would obviously consider its detail carefully, but we would be minded to accept such.
I am most grateful to the Attorney General. He has referred on a number of occasions to the withdrawal and implementation bill. He knows, as does the Secretary of State for DEXU and the Prime Minister and others, that we, in my European Scrutiny Committee, have repeatedly asked over the last month for a draft or a copy of the withdrawal and implementation bill. He's just said that if the withdrawal agreement goes through, then the withdrawal and implementation bill will follow. Will he tell the House whether, if the withdrawal agreement is not approved today, whether the withdrawal and implementation bill will come through to this House and be introduced in any event?
Well, what I can say to my honourable friend is that certainly we'd give it very careful consideration. We've taken the view up to now that before the withdrawal agreement is approved, it's premature to publish the bill. And secondly, there are certain elements of it that still remain to be finalised. But as I've said to my honourable friend privately, the moment we are in a position to do so, he, as chairman of the committee, will be among the first to see it. So I can say that. Now, I must, if I may, because I'm very conscious that it's Friday and that we need to move forward as swiftly as we can. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the House can take a single decisive step today to afford certainty to the millions of people throughout this country who are waiting for it, to have a short extension, not prolonged, that will bring our exit of the European Union to May the 22nd. There will be no further uncertainty. The political declaration can be resolved in that time, and the ratification of the bill can proceed with any amendments that might be forthcoming in connection with the subsequent negotiating stage. So I submit to the House the responsible thing. I ask the House to consider and reflect carefully, because what we have before us today is the legal right to extend. No other extension is guaranteed. Every other extension would require European parliamentary elections, as the right honourable gentleman has said. We therefore are at an important crossroads for the purposes of this nation's future and its history, and I urge all members of this House to embrace this opportunity now, when this withdrawal agreement, in its substance, is in no way objectionable to any members of this House willing to consider moving forward with it. In those circumstances, what conceivable point can there be now in not embracing this agreement, subject to further discussions on the political declaration? Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to vote for this agreement.
The question is as on the order paper. Mr. Nick Thomas Simmons.
Mr. Speaker, members of this House secured a proper, meaningful vote for a purpose. And it was so that this House would be able to make an informed judgment on the future of our whole country. The point was not only to know the terms of the withdrawal, but also to know what the future relationship was going to look like. A future relationship to shape our economy and our constituents' jobs and livelihoods for decades to come. To consider those two things together is vital, Mr. Speaker. It's what this House should rightly expect and what has always been promised, because it is central to the whole process. Article 50 itself says, and I quote, "The Union shall negotiate and conclude an agreement with the state, setting out the arrangements for its withdrawal, taking account of the framework for its future relationship with the Union." Look at the withdrawal agreement. Look at Article 184 of it. It specifically refers to the political declaration and even identifies the particular document. And in their letter to the Prime Minister of the 14th of January, Presidents Juncker and Tusk said this: "As for the link between the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration to which you make reference in your letter, it can be made clear that these two documents, whilst being of a different nature, are part of the same negotiated package. In order to underline the close relationship between the two texts, they can be published side by side in the official journal in a manner reflecting the link between the two as provided for in Article 50. And it's also, Mr. Speaker, what the Prime Minister herself has always said. On Sophie Ridge on the 21st of November last year, this was her view. "We agreed the withdrawal agreement in principle last week. The withdrawal agreement goes alongside the future relationship. It's the future relationship," she said, "that actually delivers, if you like, on people's concerns in the withdrawal agreement." I will give way in a moment. I just finished this part of my speech. "Getting that future relationship right is necessary, but nothing's agreed until everything's agreed," she says. Now, she isn't known for her flexibility, so unsurprisingly, on the 14th of January in this House, she said, again, "The link between them means that the commitments of one cannot be banked without the commitments of the other." The EU has been clear. Let me finish this section. The EU has been clear that they come as a package. Bad faith by either side in negotiating the legal instruments that will deliver the future relationship laid out in the political declaration would be a breach of their legal obligations under the withdrawal agreement. Mr. Speaker, I will give way in a moment. Mr. Speaker, how many times have I heard the Attorney-General arguing from the dispatch box when we've spoken about the backstop and the future relationship, about the importance of reasonable endeavours and good faith in ensuring that we secure in good time a future trade agreement. Yet the government has now decided to remove from our consideration today in the motion one of the documents against which you can even judge bad faith. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
The fact is, the withdrawal agreement would be accepted by the European Union. That's the first point. The second point is it sorts out the implementation period, the money, and crucially guarantees citizens' rights for my constituents, EU nationals and Brits abroad. Which part of those factors does he actually disagree with? The answer is none.
Right, I will answer. Mr. Speaker, we used to say that the political declaration was so vague it was a blindfold Brexit. But what we also now know, because the Prime Minister has made clear that she intends to leave her office, is rather than it just being a blindfold Brexit, the party opposite are asking us not only to be blindfolded, but to be led into a different room by a different Tory Prime Minister. And let me, not for a moment. And let's be clear as well. Mr. Speaker. It is a Prime Minister ultimately chosen by Conservative Party members who constitute a tiny part of the wider electorate. And the party opposite can talk about the national interest. It is not in the national interest for the future of our country to be decided by a Tory leadership contest. I'll give way to Honourable.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making excellent points, and in the process, demolishing the premise of the Attorney General's request to this House today. The Attorney General did not take my intervention, but in his speech, the Attorney General promised mechanisms and processes to Parliament to guarantee a future say. We acted in good faith in the EU Withdrawal Act with Section 13, which put both those things together. With the government today undermining that mechanism, why should we trust a word he says?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And let me be clear as well, Mr. Speaker. We on this side will never leave a Tory Prime Minister free to rip up workers' rights and protections. To put the jobs and livelihoods of our constituents at risk on a Brexit that will be driven by ideology. And as my honourable friend sets out, the motion before us today is clear, and the Attorney General is clear. It does not even pretend to meet the requirements of Section 13 of the European Union Withdrawal Act. Because that clearly says... I'll give way to
Dear. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend giving way. And in the cul-de-sac of certainty that the government are announcing today, is it not possible that they might be seeking to appeal or revoke Section 13 at some date, which would get them out of their problem?
Given the government's conduct of negotiations in recent years, who knows? You can rule very little out. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
To my five-a-side colleague for giving away, but will he kindly tell us which bits of the withdrawal agreement does he disagree with?
Mr. Speaker, we have always been clear that two documents have to be taken together: the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement. And the chicanery, Mr. Speaker, the chicanery of this government in trying to separate them does them no credit whatsoever. And The government can seek to blame others as to why it can't carry out the statutory approval process in its own legislation, but we are here today, Mr. Speaker, because this government has manifestly failed on its central policy over the past 2 years. The handling of the negotiations has been frankly disastrous. Now, the Prime Minister took office in July 2016. It was then that she could have tried, after the referendum, to build a cross-party consensus on the way forward. The Prime Minister did not. The Prime Minister called a general election in June 2017. She lost her majority, knowing then she was leading a minority government. Again, she could have reached out across this House, and she did not. I'll give way to her.
Friend for giving way. People outside of this chamber will rightly wonder what on earth is going on today, and rightly so. So can he confirm, for the benefit of my constituents and the rest of the country, that this party has voted repeatedly for Brexit, but for a different deal, for a Brexit that supports and protects jobs and workers? And if the party opposite would move their red lines a bit, we could honour the results of that referendum, as we all want to do.
Mr. Speaker, for months and months, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Brexit Secretary, and many others have set out to the Prime Minister, if only she would change her red lines, we could reach a consensus on the way forward. But rather than do that, I'll give way to him.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he agree with me that what we've heard today from the Attorney-General is an attempt to dress up political shenanigans as a requirement to get a legal certainty, when in actual fact what they're trying to do is to solve the Tory party's political problems so they can usher in an unelected right-wing Prime Minister to negotiate.
Order! Every honourable and right honourable member of this House must be heard. No attempt should be made to shout someone down, and if it is made, be in no doubt. It will fail. Joanna Cherry.
Perhaps the honourable members opposite would like to go and join the mob outside. My point is this. What this is about today is an attempt to solve their political problems and usher in a right-wing, unelected Tory Prime Minister to negotiate a Canada-style free trade agreement and a workers' rights-free Singapore-style economy.
Well, the Honourable Lady, when we talk about political chicanery today, she's absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. And remember as well, today was a non-binding motion. I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, you've not chosen any amendments, but even if you had, they wouldn't have been binding in any event, and the government could have wriggled out of them in due course. Mr. Speaker, I'll give way.
I'm an honourable friend for giving way. I'll take no lecture from the SNP that failed to vote for a customs union that could have created the conditions for compromise. But can my honourable friend confirm that it is entirely conceivable?
Order, far too much noise. The honourable gentleman must and will be heard. Jim McMahon.
Thank you. It's entirely conceivable that this could be voted through today, but then when we are required to bring forward a meaningful vote, the exact same legislation could be voted down. Exactly. What type of constitutional crisis does that create?
That's a very good point. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is promoting uncertainty rather than providing certainty. I will give way to the honourable gentleman. I must make some progress.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. It was the EU Council itself which separated these two strands of the process. Both strands have to be delivered. The letter which the honourable gentleman referred to from Presidents Tusk and Juncker whilst referring to both parts of the package, in no way suggested they had to be voted upon on the same day or simultaneously. Can I just put it gently to the honourable gentleman? He is dancing on the head of a pin to provide a fig leaf.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman should read Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act, which he voted for, which is very clear that the two documents have to be approved together. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make some progress. I'll make some progress. I've given way a number of times. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister signed off the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration in November. She was originally supposed to hold a meaningful vote on the 11th of December. Since the day she took the decision to abandon that vote, the day before it took place, 109 days have passed. She knew then that the deal was going to be defeated by a substantial margin, but she ploughed on. On the 15th of January, the government suffered the biggest defeat in parliamentary history by a margin of 230 votes on the first meaningful vote. 2 weeks later, on the 29th of January, the Prime Minister promised the House she would change the withdrawal agreement. What I am talking about, she said, is not a further exchange of letters, but a significant and legally binding change to the withdrawal agreement. Negotiating such a change will not be easy. It will involve reopening the withdrawal agreement. Now, Mr. Speaker, at this late stage in negotiations, any withdrawal agreement would have required the backstop. It was always totally unrealistic for the Prime Minister to pretend she could drop the backstop entirely or make substantive changes to the withdrawal agreement. Yet she wasted weeks and weeks on this fruitless pursuit, including voting for the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Altrincham and Sale West, which required the Northern Ireland backstop to be replaced by alternative arrangements. Those arrangements have not been secured, and they could never have been secured. On the 12th of March, the government suffered the fourth largest defeat in parliamentary history by a margin of 149 votes on the second meaningful vote. And now the government, Mr. Speaker, tries to carve out the withdrawal agreement in a last-ditch attempt to save a botched deal that has failed to even come close to commanding the support of a majority of this House. This Prime Minister has recklessly run down the clock. She knows her deal is unacceptable, and she has failed time and time again to listen and to change course. Mr. Speaker, too often this government has ignored motions of this House. It took Parliament to fight for a meaningful vote on the two documents, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, to be considered together. To suggest that they should be considered separately now is to go back on what the government has been saying about the importance of the link between them for months and months. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. As always, he is giving a fine performance at the dispatch box, highlighting the Labour Party's position. But could I seek from him 2 points of clarity? As was made clear by my honourable friend from Ashfield, the Labour Party has put forward on numerous occasions what we consider to be an acceptable form of Brexit. Could he confirm for me, if the Prime Minister were to relent on her red lines and accept that form of Brexit, and the Labour Party were to consider that acceptable,
we'll do it on Monday.
Would the Labour Party still consider that deal requiring a confirmatory vote in the public? And secondly, on the 12th of April, when this deal fails this evening, our choice will be no deal or a lengthy extension. Could he outline for me what length of extension the Labour Party will be seeking and for what purpose?
The purpose of the extension is always the critical issue. And let me just say, in respect of the issue of a comprehensive...
Mr. Seeley, calm yourself. Your attempt to intervene was politely rejected. You don't holler across the chamber, man. Calm yourself. Zen. Nick Thomas Simmons.
Say to my honourable friend, we've been putting the idea of a comprehensive customs union for months and months and months. The reason it is being properly considered is because of the Prime Minister, nothing to do with the opposition. And let me be clear today, Mr. Speaker. We will never mortgage all our futures on the outcome of a Conservative leadership party contest over which most members of this House have no control at all and would have to sit back and watch. Without the clarity and protections we need in the political declaration, we should not approve this withdrawal agreement. Today's vote is a shoddy gimmick. from a desperate government that is trying to hide away from the reality that this House would still need to bring the meaningful vote in the form of the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement back to this House. The Prime Minister's deal for months and months has simply created division and discord when we need a consensus on the way forward. The national interest, Mr. Speaker, is in building a consensus for a future that protects the jobs and livelihoods of all our constituents, and that's why the House should reject this motion today.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've heard a great deal.
Order. I understand the hubbub in the chamber and an air of excitement for which I'm sure the honourable gentleman, the member for Stone, is suitably grateful. But the House must hear colleagues deliver their speeches, in the first instance to that of the Chair of the European Scrutiny Committee. Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have heard a great deal about the process and the underlying reasons for this motion this morning. But actually, Mr. Speaker, what we are really dealing with here is whether or not this withdrawal agreement should be passed and approved today or not, and if not, why not? The first point I would make in that respect is quite simple and straightforward. It is this, that we, under Article 4 of this agreement, will, for a significant period of time, lose control over the lawmaking which is conferred upon this House by virtue of our election as members of Parliament according to the wishes of the voters in general elections. It is unconscionable, for whatever reason, that this House should be politically castrated by the arrangements set out in this Article 4. Mr. Speaker, it is unthinkable, therefore, that this withdrawal agreement should be passed for that reason alone. And I would just refer to the state of affairs within the German Constitutional Court, which takes precedence over all EU laws. The Court often expresses rulings that insist that the EU can only operate or legislate in accordance with what the Bundestag has given it, and that EU actions are illegal if they depart from the terms in which the Bundestag gave that power. If that is good enough for Germany, Mr. Speaker, it is good enough for this country, is it not? The further point, and this is why I asked the Attorney General about the question of whether or not there would be a withdrawal and implementation bill, even if this withdrawal agreement goes down this evening. And the short answer to that is I got no answer, just as I received no answer from the Prime Minister to several questions I put to her about whether or not the Attorney General had given legal advice in accordance with the Ministerial Code. One of the characteristics of this debate is that when you ask a difficult question, you tend to get no answer. That is not good enough in terms of the accountability of the government to this House. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the point number one regarding the control over laws. It is unconscionable. Secondly, I certainly will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, with whom I have regular discussions. He makes a very interesting point about Germany and the fact that the Bundesverfassungsgericht has often made this point. But is it not true that actually it amounts to no more than to coin a phrase, a political declaration by a court? Because were it tested in front of the ECJ, it would be shown that German law is inferior to European law in just the same way it is for every other member state, and that's why we in the United Kingdom have to have legal exit and stop being a member state, however painful the route it is to get there.
I understand my honourable friend's point, but I have to also point out to him that under EU law, the constitutional orders of the member states, under several cases, Van Genden, Luce and Costa and other ones of the similar kind, it is made abundantly clear that the European Court actually itself asserts superiority over the internal constitutional orders of the country in question. And the reality is that there is a conflict demonstrated by the competence case in relation to the question that he's raised and I've raised, because it is, as I stated, the German Constitutional Court will not countenance direct contradiction with its own law-making. Now, the next point I wish to make, Mr. Speaker, is regarding the Northern Ireland backstop. Now, I know there will be many members of this House who are more than familiar with this. We've spent an enormous amount of time, and justifiably, over this question. But what it really boils down to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that this is about the constitutional status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. The European Communities Act 1972, Mr. Speaker, was a
Order, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do think, if I may say so, we should reflect on the fact that this debate is being widely viewed, and it is rather discourteous when a member is addressing the House for there to be a hubbub. Let's listen to the honourable gentleman. Sir William Cash.
I may add to that point, Mr. Speaker, that if they are so blind that they do not want to listen to these points, then, as far as I'm concerned, it makes no difference to me, because the points I'm making are significantly important regarding the question of whether or not we agree to this withdrawal agreement or not. I'll certainly give way.
I'm so grateful to the honourable friend for giving way. Isn't the problem that he makes a series of very powerful points? Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I do apologise. Isn't the problem that my honourable friend makes a series of very good points, but he's letting the perfect be the enemy of the acceptable? Exactly. And today we have the chance to leave the European Union, and he and others are preventing that happening, Mr. Speaker.
I, of course, want to leave the European Union, but the problem with this withdrawal agreement is it does not, I assert, represent Brexit in the terms in which the repeal of the 1972 Act, which, as I was saying just now, is an Act of Parliament not only of Great Britain, but also with Northern Ireland. Therefore, the constitutional status of Northern Ireland is at stake with respect to the question of the Northern Ireland backstop, and there is no doubt about that. I'll certainly give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it the case that this withdrawal agreement places irreversible damage forever and will be lasting on Northern Ireland and on our precious Union?
I hear the Prime Minister repeatedly stating when the question of our precious Union. This Northern Ireland backstop drives a coach and horses through the question of the precious Union. That is the problem. And I would further say that the reason why, as I understand it, the DUP will be voting against the withdrawal agreement today is precisely for that purpose. It puts the Union at risk. I will continue. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Is it his view that we're not being shown the bill to implement the withdrawal agreement today, because that would reveal that we have to remove the repeal of the 72 Act or reintroduce all the European Union powers, proving that this is not leaving the European Union?
All agrees exactly the point, and I see the Solicitor General chuntering a bit. He's a good friend of mine, but I have to say that he knows that this is a serious point. And they have, in discussions, the Attorney General referred to private conversations I've had. I will now refer to one I've had with both him and the Solicitor General. He acknowledges that this is something which would need to be sorted out, because there is a serious worry. And what happened, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, is very simply stated. On the 26th of June last year, we passed the Withdrawal Act 2018. Section 1 says the European Communities Act 1972 is repealed on exit day. Exit day operates in lockstep with whatever exit day turns out to be. However, the reality is that because of the saving provisions and under Article 4, the capacity of the court to disapply enactments it is just conceivable, in fact I believe it is highly potentially possible, that there will be issues of interpretation which could arise. We need to discuss this properly, but we can't do it unless we see a copy of that bill. And that is, I know that my honourable friend agrees. In fact, I have ministers, some secretaries of state, who've actually said to me, without disclosing their names, that they do think that we should see a copy of this bill. Because until we see the drafting of it, it isn't possible for us to be able to make a judgment about the impact that it will have on the repeal of the 1972 Act, which itself is the anchor of the referendum. And I repeat the point I'm making about this because the referendum itself was endorsed by a sovereign act of this Parliament, sovereign act, which transferred the decisions to the British people. And the British people made that decision in line with the wishes of the electorate. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful, and I'm perfectly clear that whatever the public voted for in the referendum or at the last general election, nobody had a clue they were going to be voting for a withdrawal agreement, anything like the one before the House today. But can I ask him about a matter of good faith? Because I interpreted the Attorney-General's remarks to be a suggestion that we should perhaps approve this today in order to satisfy the technical terms of the extension agreed by the 27 on the basis of some kind of a ruse to get an extra extension, even though we haven't actually approved the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration in the terms that we said we would. Is that an act of good faith with our European partners?
I very much agree with what my right honourable friend is saying. And I go further and say that the change of gear between the 26th of June, when the Withdrawal Act received royal assent, and the 6th of July, and then the introduction of the White Paper after the Chequers proposals, demonstrated to me bad faith, because it must have been pre-planned while that withdrawal bill was going through, with which I was thoroughly in agreement and gave every conceivable assistance to the government to get it through. And the reality is that because it was only produced 10 days later, you only have to ask the question, how can they write an 80-page white paper without planning it some months in advance? I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my my honourable friend for giving way, and you know I revere him when it comes to constitutional law. I just wonder, in the course of his argument, I wonder, isn't he slightly making the case that we need to get to the bill, because it is within the bill, and we debate the bill, that we actually then end up being able to decide what are the protections left. And I would love to hear him in the bill, because I will certainly support his amendments when we get to the bill.
That's a very, very good point. Because, and I make this point, and that is why I've been saying to the Attorney-General just now, will he give me an assurance, and he didn't answer my question, that if the withdrawal agreement is not approved tonight, are they going to bring in the bill anyway? Because there are a lot of people who I'm hearing, as Chairman of the Europe, well, I'm very glad to see that the Leader of the House shakes her head, that the withdrawal agreement will not be followed if it is rejected by a bill. Is that absolutely crystal clear? I look at the Leader of the House. Is it quite clear? There will be no bill if, in fact, this agreement is rejected. She doesn't answer. Well, that is the point. So what I say to the House is this: this European Council meeting, this European Council decision, is yet another example of the manner in which this country, this great country, has again effectively capitulated to the demands of the European Council. That is one of my greatest objections to this motion, as well as all the other things I've mentioned. And it is exactly the same as when the European Scrutiny Committee last March, a whole year ago, made a report saying we should never, ever have accepted the sequencing or, for that matter, the terms of reference laid down by the European Union. We have capitulated. This is not compromise, Mr. Speaker. This has been capitulation. And that is the reason why it is so important that the House recognises this in the vote this evening. Yeah, I will give way to the lady.
Sylvia.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm enormously grateful that patience is paid off. Let me take the honourable member back to his remarks about Northern Ireland. May I just gently remind him that the DUP do not speak for the majority of people in Northern Ireland. And may I also reflect the fact that the Prime Minister cares deeply about the United Kingdom. She cares so deeply about the United Kingdom that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement and the consent principle are protected in her withdrawal deal. They're protected in black and white, and therefore the constitutional status of Northern Ireland remains the same. It remains in the hands of the people of Northern Ireland voting in a border poll.
Go in the hands of Brussels.
I'm grateful. I have great respect for the Honourable Lady. I only say this, that we've had this debate before. We do differ about it. I, of course, want to see the Good Friday Agreement retained. It's been a tremendous triumph, and I don't wish in any way to disparage that. What I do say, however, is that there are very, very serious questions about the constitutional status of Northern Ireland as a result of the backstop. And I say this to some of my honourable friends who themselves may have changed their minds in respect of whether or not they would approve this withdrawal agreement. I will simply say this, that I have heard all of them, good friends of mine, repeatedly objecting to the fact that this backstop is there. We've had the distinguished Attorney General and the distinguished Solicitor General opining on this subject, and we've had some very interesting outcomes. But the reality is that the Northern Ireland backstop is a massive impediment. In fact, it is an insuperable impediment to agreeing this withdrawal agreement. I will give way.
Very grateful. He talks about opting back in to the European Communities Act, which we all know is what will happen in the transition. But there's a key word there, transition. Does he not accept the risk today of defeating this withdrawal agreement is that we will stay in the European Communities Act forever?
No, because there is no suggestion, and I've heard, that the repeal of the 1972 Act would be itself, the repeal of that Act would be repealed. From either side of the House, there is no question about that, and the reality is that because that is an Act of Parliament and set in stone, I do not believe that that will happen, and furthermore, that the consequence of our moving on to the next phases will reinforce that, and that is my view. I can only say that the British people will be incredibly angry, and they will be very devastated if they find that the repeal of the 1972 Act takes place. And that would be a massive breach of faith with the British people. I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to give way. I understand he will oppose this motion on the basis that he wants a clean break with the European Union. I understand that. But does he realise he'll be walking through the lobbies with people who are looking for a very, very soft Brexit or no Brexit at all? So one of those parties, either you or they, are going to be very, very disappointed.
Well, I will only say this, with respect to that point, that actually I have witnessed over the last few weeks members of my own party, sadly and tragically, repeatedly going through the lobbies, and I even saw the Prime Minister the other day going through the lobbies with the Leader of the Opposition on a certain motion. What I'm saying to you is that this is because of the enormous issues that are at stake in relation to the question of who governs us. And that is really why this entire debate is so vitally important to our future. And that is why the repeal of the 72 Act is central to that question.
Will you give way?
I will give way to...
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I particularly appreciate his remarks in respect of Northern Ireland. But the honourable lady, the member for North Down, is precisely right. Will he reflect on the fact that bastions of unionism, such as the Federation of Small Businesses, the CBI, the Ulster Farmers Union and Ulster Chambers of Commerce, are all in favour of the withdrawal agreement?
I know that, and I've heard it, but so have the DUP themselves. And I simply say, before I give way to the right honourable gentleman, the reality is that they sit here in this House, having been elected themselves on a proposition. This issue, Mr. Speaker, is all about democratic decision-making. It's about the honesty with which we approach it. It's to do with the trust that is inherent in our taking the instructions of the British people in accordance with the Sovereign Referendum Act. I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
And the Democratic Unionist Party has never pretended that it represents the majority of everyone in Northern Ireland, but it represents more people than anybody else. The fact of the matter is there is no party in this House, in government in Scotland, Wales or here, that represents a majority. We have the same proportion of the vote as the SNP in Scotland. Let us be very clear. Let us be very clear. As the right honourable gentleman has pointed out, that every single unionist party in Northern Ireland, never mind individual voices or business groups, every single unionist party, the Ulster Unionists, the TUV, the Progressive Unionists, and all unionist parties agree with the position that this is a problem for the Union. Let not people pretend that it is otherwise. That is why we have worked very hard with the Prime Minister to try to get those changes to the backstop that would have allowed us to vote on the withdrawal agreement. That is why we backed the Brady Amendment. That is why we worked with her. Sadly, we have not made sufficient progress, but let no one pretend that we don't speak for the Unionists of Northern Ireland.
We agree with every word that the right honourable member has said. This is true. And it is not good enough to talk about our precious union and to damage it. And it is not good enough to say that we will not truly leave the European Union unless we regain control over our laws, which the Prime Minister said in the Lancaster House Agreement, and then for us to arrive at a point where we are politically castrated precisely because for a number of years we will be put at the mercy of our competitors. That is the key issue. It's not just the question of sovereignty in its own right, it's the practical impact as a result of which we will end up by being put at the mercy of our competitors, for example, in relation to state aids. I think, Mr. Speaker, it is important now for me to end my remarks because, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm very glad, I expect all that from this rabble across the road, that doesn't trouble me one bit. I have done my best, Mr. Speaker, over many, many years to ensure the democracy and sovereignty of this House. And I will never give way on that point. For me, this is a matter of principle. The record speaks for itself. I wish I could vote for this withdrawal agreement, but I have to say it comes, for me, down to a simple question of integrity and a matter of principle. And anyone who wants to question me on that matter can do so. But I say to them, I'm doing this with the best of intentions, as a matter of conscience and as a matter of record.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say it's disappointing that as I stand up to speak on behalf of the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government that the Prime Minister has walked out the chamber. I regret that that is the response that we get from the Prime Minister, all too common, I must say. And this is on the day that the Prime Minister told us that the UK would leave the European Union with a deal. She's come to Parliament defeated and desperate. This is a Prime Minister who is willing to break every promise she has made to this House and to the people of the United Kingdom. This is a Prime Minister who has had to offer her own resignation to get her own party to support her bad Brexit deal. This is a Prime Minister obsessed with power but powerless. Mr. Speaker, instead of serving the interests of all these islands, this Tory government is seeking to serve the interests of no one but the Tory party, and even that has not worked. The Prime Minister cannot pull her fractured party together, and we in this House and the rest of the UK will pay a price for that failure to seek a broader consensus. Mr. Speaker, it is time they were stopped. I take no credit from pointing out to the Prime Minister that at no time has she sought to reconcile the 52% who voted to leave
and the 48% who voted to remain. All we seemed to get was the constant refrain that Brexit means Brexit and we were leaving on the 29th of March. There was no attempt to go beyond the soundbite and engage. No attempt to engage across this House. No attempt to engage with the devolved administrations. It has always been her way or the highway. And of course, all she's done is sought to meet the demands of the ERG.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and he sets out well the game playing that has gone on up until today. And there's no doubt that there's game playing going on with the motion today, but it appears that some Labour MPs may be getting bought by that game playing, in spite of the damage that it's going to cause to our constituents, our poorest constituents, in spite of the cost that it is going to have in terms of this terrible Brexit, but also that it's going to usher in a right-wing Tory Prime Minister, even worse than the disaster we have right now. Can my right honourable friend reflect on the damage to Labour that that vote, passing by this House, by Labour votes, would have on the Labour Party in Scotland?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. We are at a very dangerous juncture. And I appeal to members on the Labour benches to think very, very carefully as to where we are today. Because if the government, somehow or other, manages to get this through on the back of Labour MPs voting for this government, we know that the Prime Minister is going to depart. I will in a second. We know that the Prime Minister is going to depart. And we're all going to be left in the hands of the Tory MPs that are going to appoint a new Prime Minister. A Prime Minister who is in all event likely to be a Brexiteer. And I appeal to Labour members. Don't give that authority to the Conservative Party. Don't be the midwives of Brexit. Don't allow this Tory government, on the backs of a few Labour MPs, to deliver a hard Brexit that is going to imperil all our constituents, and I give way.
Thank him for giving way. Can we have a bit less of the holier-than-thou grandstanding from the SNP on this issue? Let's be honest, they would be completely happy for the current deal, with all its faults and the danger to Northern Ireland, to go on a ballot paper on a people's vote, with the possibility that that could be the deal that people vote for. Where's the integrity in that?
My goodness, Mr. Speaker, you know, this is a very serious moment for all of us. And I applaud the million-odd people that marched in London last weekend, the 6 million people that have want to see revoke on the ballot paper, and I will in a second. But I do appeal to Labour members, because if you go through the lobbies tonight with the Conservatives, then you're delivering a hard Tory Brexit. And you will pay a price economically for that. And thank goodness in Scotland, Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity to defend ourselves, because we will not allow ourselves to be dragged out of the European Union. And it will usher in the day that the thing that so many members of this House tell us that they want to preserve, the Union of the United Kingdom, that will be over. Because Scotland will and Scotland must become an independent member of the European Union.
Speak for Scotland. I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. The first thing I would say is that SNP does not speak for Scotland. The second thing is, and I think the honourable gentleman needs to reflect on this, everyone on this side of the House, with the exception of a few people who are standing up for their constituents, are on the same side, and he should remember that. His entire speech so far has attacked the Labour Party, but tells you all you need to know about the Nationalists. So I would say to the right honourable gentleman, rather than using his speech to attack the Labour Party when we'll all be in the same lobby tonight, why was he not in the lobby with us with the Customs Union on Wednesday night, and he could have been out of this mess?
You know, I say to my honourable friend, and he knows I have respect for him, that I want us to unite together. I'm not attacking the Labour Party. You know, you can laugh, but what I'm saying to Labour members is don't be duped by voting for the Conservatives today. Have some backbone, and let's make sure that all of us are united. That's what I'm appealing for you to do. But the Labour Party have to reflect on the fact that in 2014 in Scotland, that's exactly what you did. You joined with the Conservatives in better together. And you would have thought by now that you would have learned the lesson. That the reason that you become also-rans in Scottish politics is because time after time you side with the Tories. One of these days, the Labour Party have to understand that they should be standing up with the people of Scotland. And let me say to the honourable member, I can see him gesticulating wildly, that day of the referendum...
Order! Order, I'm sorry. There is a very disorderly atmosphere in the House. Sustained barracking and finger-pointing of a most unseemly kind. Please, let's try to lower the decibel level and treat each other with respect. Mr. Ian Blackford.
You are, of course, quite right, Mr. Speaker. But I say to the Labour Party that the day will come where there will be a referendum on Scottish independence. And I hope next time that they decide to stand with the people of Scotland and we can get that safe passage towards independence in Europe. I am going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, there has been no attempt to engage across this House, no attempt to engage with the devolved institutions. It has always been the Prime Minister's way or the highway. There has been no appreciation that rather than being sucked in to reconcile herself with the ERG, the Prime Minister should have sought to work across party. Mr. Speaker, last Wednesday the Prime Minister met opposition party leaders. Many of us set out our positions, but crucially, Mr. Speaker, when we extended an olive branch and sought to work with the Prime Minister, it was rejected. It was the Prime Minister who would not budge, transfixed, repeating the same old mantra, caught in a trap of her own making. Leadership brings responsibility. It has been sadly lacking in this case. It is little wonder that we are left in this situation, that the Prime Minister is isolated from the other parties in this House and leaving the UK in a position of division. I will give you
the right honourable gentleman giving way, and I'm really delighted that he's now looking at the substance of the government's motion, because I think it's really important that all of us who see this motion for what it is and are going to vote against it stick together, don't turn against each other. But can he help us with this? Has he had the opportunity, and would he welcome the opportunity, to speak to the Attorney-General about, and I'm sure he's going to come off his phone in a minute, if somebody could give him a prod. Prod. Thank you. Prod. Hello. Has he had the opportunity to speak to the Attorney-General, and would he take that opportunity to speak to the Attorney-General to discover the intention of the government in relation to the withdrawal bill, and whether it's their intention to revoke Section 13 of the Withdrawal Act we passed last year?
Hear, hear.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct, and we've had no clarity from the Attorney-General on that issue. And let me applaud the right honourable lady and members of the Liberal Democrats and of Plaid Cymru and of the Green Member of Parliament, because, Mr. Speaker, we have all sought to work together. We have all sought to, and those on the Labour side as well, we have all sought to work together to bring unity to the opposition, to present a credible alternative. And on Monday, I hope that we do that we can coalesce around a motion that we can support, that sends a very clear message to the European Council ahead of its meeting on the 10th of April. And we say to the European Union, on the basis of the government being able to achieve a consensus, trust the House of Parliament, trust the members. But it is in that spirit that I say to all colleagues in this House, and I plead with you, under no circumstances, vote with the government today. Don't make it easy for this government to deliver us into a blind Brexit. I'm going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, I don't think I will forget the Prime Minister failing to take responsibility for her own failings and blaming Parliament for the impasse. In so doing, seeking to put Parliament against the people in a way that was quite shameless. Having made a catastrophic error of judgment, we are still waiting for an apology. Where is that apology, Prime Minister? Today, Mr Speaker, we must close the door on the Prime Minister's proposal. Close the door and move on. Parliament today must reject this shambolic proposal before us. I will give way.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of the Right Honourable Member for giving way. But would you agree with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the Scottish NFU, the Scottish CBI and the Federation of Small Business that what is important today that Scottish MPs, that all the MPs in the United Kingdom vote for jobs and businesses in their constituencies? And voting against the motion makes no deal more likely. And Scotland is watching the SNP.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I would ask him to reflect on the situation that every local authority area in Scotland voted to remain. And the people of Scotland can reflect on the fact that the 13 Conservative MPs have failed time and time again, Mr Speaker, to stand up for the people of Scotland. And when I hear the honourable gentleman praising the unicorn of no deal, it is very simple, because what he must do, along with his colleagues, the so-called Scottish Conservatives, is to vote with us on Monday to support the motion on revocation and stop this Conservative government driving Scotland out of the European Union, because, Mr Speaker, that is the way to protect jobs in Scotland.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I'm sure Scotland, unlike the Prime Minister, is watching and listening to him. Is he aware, like me, from talking to his businesses in his constituency and businesses across Scotland, that their foremost consideration is that freedom of movement should be preserved for the benefit of the Scottish economy and because of Scotland's demographics? And is that one of the main reasons that SNP MPs cannot vote for this withdrawal agreement, because it ushers in the end of freedom of movement?
My learned and honourable friend is absolutely correct. We've been enriched by freedom of movement. We've been enriched by those that have come to live and work and contribute to life in Scotland. And it's perhaps the most shameful aspect of this whole consideration, that we're turning back, that we're turning inwards, and we're closing the door on those that would come to Scotland and help us grow our economy. You know, Mr Speaker, our population has barely grown over the course of the last 100 years. It started to increase over the course of the last decade. And the Conservatives opposite want to put that handbrake and to stop those that want to come and live and work in our beautiful country. We want them to come in, and that is why, Mr Speaker, that not only must we reject this motion today, but yes, we must stop Brexit in all our interests. Mr Speaker, I'm going to make some progress because I'm aware that other people wish to speak. We were promised another vote on the Prime Minister's deal, but because the Prime Minister knows she has no support for her deal, she comes here to play games, to trick MPs that backing her disastrous deal, yet it's still the same deal the House voted against not once but twice. Mr Speaker, this deal should be dead. Before us are the terms in which the Prime Minister wants us to agree to withdraw from the European Union without any clarity about our future. Mr Speaker, this is a blindfold Brexit. I'll give way one more time.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman, but can I just beg him, because I'm standing in front of a plaque that says more in common than divides us, and he knows in this House on many issues we put aside the party issues and we have very subtly, sometimes worked together on certain issues. And I beg him today to just, as he ends his speech, to come a little bit back on calling all of us who believe that this isn't an honest debate today. This is a confidence trick to trick us into misleading our constituents. We are nearly there. We can defeat this. Let's stay together.
Well, I have to say, I applaud the honourable gentleman for that intervention, because I agree with him, and that's precisely what we're seeking to do. And I hope all his colleagues, every single one of his colleagues, stay with us today, and we can defeat this government. I'm conscious, Mr. Speaker, of time, and I've been generous with interventions. I do now want to make some progress. How can any MP agree to sleepwalk in behind a deal that they have no idea what it means for the future of our countries, our constituents and our communities? It is incomprehensible that anyone could even consider simply taking the Prime Minister's word for it, especially a Prime Minister who can't even be truthful about living up to her word. Like her predecessor, the Prime Minister is going to ride off into the sunset after delivering crisis, chaos and further uncertainty for the UK. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has committed the ultimate betrayal. She is abdicating all responsibility. How humiliating, how reckless. History will remember her premiership as one defined by cowardice, falsights and negligence. Mr. Speaker, I cannot believe that any leader could take us to this place. It is a disgrace. The constant promises to find consensus, to find a way forward, yet the Prime Minister has done as expected. She has run down the clock, only to ignore the wishes of Parliament, the wishes of the people, and engage in a game of blackmail and trickery to win support. It is an absolute outrage that those who go through the lobbies in support of the Prime Minister and the Government will be responsible for aiding and abetting the greatest act of self-harm in the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, the arguments against the Prime Minister's plan do not need to be rehearsed. They are well known in this House. They are well known to every household in the country. But let me say this. It is not only the substance of the plans the Prime Minister has put together, but it is the disgusting treatment that the Prime Minister and the Tory government have displayed towards the people of Scotland that need to be known in every household in Scotland. One more time.
Some time ago, the right honourable gentleman talked about the enrichment of free movement. Isn't it the fact that the greatest enrichment of free movement enjoyed by Scotland has been the free movement between the nations of the United Kingdom? And isn't it ironic that he talks about the Prime Minister not paying attention to the 48%? He absolutely fails to pay attention to the 55% who voted to stay within the United Kingdom. And when is he going to acknowledge that he is a member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and not just a Scottish member?
My goodness, I was almost expecting the honourable gentleman to burst into a chorus of land and hope of glory. Is he really suggesting, friends, that people from Scotland won't have the right to come and live and work in the rest of the United Kingdom? Is that what he's suggesting? Because, quite frankly, if he should apologise, because that's a disgrace. And it's just what we see from so many Tory members seeking to threaten the people of Scotland with sanctions. I have to say to him, it really lacks any degree of dignity. It really is the case that the Tories think they can do whatever they want to Scotland and get away with it. So much, Mr. Speaker, for the partnership of equals. We've been ignored, silenced and sidelined. The futures of citizens across Scotland and the rest of the UK held to ransom by right-wing Brexiteers and the DUP. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has no mandate from Scotland and has no right to assert that her version of Brexit is the only version of Brexit. Lies brought the country to vote for Brexit in the first place, and they certainly didn't vote to become poorer and to be faced with the prospect of troops being mobilised to manage basic services. How extraordinary that a Prime Minister in the United Kingdom is threatening us with troops on the streets, because, Mr. Speaker, that is the reality. Mr. Speaker, with one internal conference vote, one parliamentary conference vote, with the government being held in contempt of Parliament for the first time in history, with scores of her ministers resigning, and with her flagship policy in ruins, the Prime Minister has no legitimacy or authority left to carry forward her policy or speak for the country. And, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister certainly does not have any authority, nor will she ever have authority for Westminster to tell the people of Scotland what to do. The people of Scotland will decide what's best for the people of Scotland. Now, more than ever, that reality has been needed to sink into the minds of politicians across this chamber, and on that point, I'll give way to one of the Scottish colleagues.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he have a kindly word for the businesses in Scotland? And does he have a kindly word for the over 1 million people who voted to leave the EU? The 1 million people are from Scotland.
Yes, of course I do, Mr. Speaker, because businesses in Scotland know that the best way to protect their interest is to stay in the European Union. Every economic analysis of any substance that's been published has shown us that we're going to be poorer. And I say to those that voted for Brexit in Scotland, of course we understand why you voted the way that you do, and we of course will listen to your concerns. But our obligation is to speak with everyone and to have that open conversation and dialogue as to what's in the best interests of the people of Scotland. How do we grow prosperity in Scotland? How do we deliver a fairer Scotland? And that is why independence offers the best option for all of us. Mr. Speaker, Westminster clearly has no interest in doing what is right for Scotland if it votes for this motion this afternoon. Westminster has no authority over the rights and the freedoms of the people of Scotland. And Westminster will never, not ever, be an authority of the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine our futures and to choose to be a European nation.
Would my honourable friend give way? I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it interesting that whilst he's talking about Westminster not being interested in the people of Scotland, there are members on the benches opposite gesturing for him to sit down and be quiet? Other people have spoken. The front bench leader of the SNP has a right to speak in this chamber, same as every other member.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend that it's absolutely right that we are sent here 35 SNP MPs to stand up for our constituents, the majority in Scotland. And at a time that this House is threatening to take us out of the European Union against our will, I can absolutely guarantee that the voice of Scotland and the voice of Remain will be heard in this chamber, and no Conservative MP is going to shut Scotland down. Mr. Speaker, this Tory government has wasted £4 billion on investing in no-deal preparations. This money should never have been spent, and we should have ruled out no deal as a possibility long ago. Why did the Prime Minister not do that? The PM regularly says that all MPs have a duty to deliver Brexit. Above all duties mandated to the SNP, we are elected to stand up for Scotland's interest and Scotland's voice. It is clear that no one else will, and we are making it absolutely crystal clear. We will never accept Brexit on behalf of the people of Scotland. The Prime Minister has prescribed her Brexit deal to Scotland despite decisive and unanimous analysis that this will be bad for our country and do irreparable damage to our key relationships. Even some of our cabinet seem to agree. 100,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker, could be lost from Scotland if Westminster backs the Prime Minister. EU workers needed to grow our economy, denied to Scotland if the Tories get their way. Our economy smaller, our people poorer, and our country isolated. Mr. Speaker, the SNP will not ever do that to Scotland. We will not back the Prime Minister. We will always stand up and put Scotland's interests first. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I want to say that I am angry. I am frustrated, but I am too deeply saddened that we have reached this point. Imagine how people think up and down the United Kingdom. They are ashamed of this Parliament, ashamed and embarrassed of British politics and the laughingstock that we have become in the world. But I want to say to people watching at home, we in the SNP are embarrassed too. We are appalled at the behaviour of those on the government benches and many of those on the official opposition benches as well. They have let you down. They have broken Britain and now they have no idea how to fix it. While the Tory and the Labour parties scramble on a race to the bottom, I say to them, listen up. The people are watching. 1 million people marched to demand a second EU referendum. 6 million people signed a petition to revoke Article 50. Are we listening to their voices? And the answer has to be no. Yes, the SNP is here to stand up for Scotland. We are proud to represent the voices of Scotland and to stand up for the democratically expressed will of our people and our Parliament. But, Mr Speaker, we also care about the rest of the United Kingdom, about our friends and our neighbours. But I deeply question, Mr Speaker, the motives of the Tory and the Labour leadership. The power is in all of our hands. Let us use it. I plead to members, vote down the government's proposition this afternoon. Let us put the question back to the people. The Prime Minister has lost control. The government is out of control. The Leader of the Opposition is unwilling to exert control over all of his party. So let us give power back to the people, end this stalemate and give certainty back to businesses, assurances to EU workers, and let us salvage our bond with our European neighbours. It is not too late. We cannot give up. Take back control and give power back to the people.
Order. An 8-minute limit on backbench speeches applies with immediate effect. Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman. He'll forgive me if I don't completely follow him, because we would never finish this debate. So I want to appraise the House of my view on this particular motion. First of all, this motion, as my right honourable and learned friend said, is not the motion that we have already voted on. This is a different motion. And I'm not going to make any excuse about it. It is a different motion. Now, the other side agreed it, so how they can laugh, I don't know. The reality is today I am going to support the government in this. I'm going to do it for a very simple reason, that I think nothing huge has changed within the nature of the bill that is likely to come ahead of us, or even within the withdrawal agreement. But I do think what has changed is the balance of risks. And I think as politicians, not lawyers, as politicians, we need to appraise ourselves of what that balance amounts to, and therefore to what degree we owe ourselves to make those decisions. When I look at it, I recognise at the moment, since we had the 2-week extension, we now face a choice about, therefore, what is likely to happen. Some of my colleagues do genuinely believe that there was no chance that if we vote this down, we go to the 12th, and that we will not get any extension from the EU. I just find that very difficult to believe. I think if one looks at what the EU has already said, Mrs Merkel and various others, they really do want to keep the UK inside the EU. One way or the other, they would rather have us in, even if it's troublesome at the stage they want it. And I genuinely believe by the 12th we will be offered, or even demanded of, that is to say, we're given at least a 2-year extension, which will require us to fight the European elections. And I don't know how I'm going to go onto the doorstep, having campaigned to leave the European Union, to support 17.4 million people, and then tell them, don't worry, we're not leaving right now, but we may leave a little bit later. That is simply inexplicable, and I don't believe genuinely for myself it is what I campaigned on or campaigned for. The second area that some have said is that actually it's all right because an extension doesn't really matter, because we'll be able to stay in the EU and we'll be able to make those negotiations and get those changes, and we are in control because we have votes and we have an ability to take that control. All I say to them, I voted against Maastricht 26 years ago, and I've always maintained that we have never had real control. And in 40 years, if we had so much control, why are we here now trying to get out of a European Union that has extended its power and its competence year in, year out? Will you forgive me for 1 second? I want to make a point, and I'll give way but once, because, as Mr. Speaker says, we want to try and keep this short. So my point about this is I genuinely believe that the way to stand up for the 17.4 million is now to get to the bill. And I said to my honourable friend who's not here in his place from Stone, who I revere, as I said, in constitutional law, here he is. I say to my honourable friend, Bill needs to get to the bill. And the reason for that is we will then look and see what of the Attorney General's issues that he raised and how he protects us is in the bill. What can we ensure is in this bill? And we can then still make a judgment about whether this bill represents what we believe is the way in which we should leave. And I therefore say to my honourable friends, they do need to consider this immediately. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful for him giving way. On the 3rd of March, on his website, the right honourable member said British governments have lied about the EU for decades. This deal is the final deceit, and he's going to vote for it.
My simple point that I simply make to him is absolutely, this has been a trail of deceit on both sides of the House by different governments. But the judgment I'm taking today is what is that balance of risks? I believe that the one saving grace of this so far is that we do repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, and that means that we will have left the European Union. And the point I make about that is why that is a single issue that I would take. As my honourable friend, the member for Stone, said earlier on, we need to get to the bill and figure out how that is protected. Is that the default mechanism? And is the attorney's comment right that they will protect? No, I'm not giving way because others wish to speak. That the attorney's comment that that is the right place to be is the way to be. I want my government not to be deceitful and to own up as to whether or not that bill does protect those rights, and for my honourable and right honourable friends to make that judgment at that particular point when we've actually seen the bill. And I say to my honourable and right honourable friends, genuinely today, this is an opportunity for us to get this going. If we don't, we go to the 12th of the month. And what we have in that particular case is only a very simple statement that we will extend. An extension is death in terms of our voters, the people that actually put us here, that wanted us to get this through. And I only ask my honourable and right honourable friends, look around you. Here we are, we sit. Every one of the speeches made, even the interventions, is demanding that we go to the 12th because they know we will get that extension. So it's very important. We are in a chamber of people who really don't want to leave the European Union at all. And I know and honour my friends who have fought and campaigned to get this changed. But I simply say to them right now, we need to have a moment when we recognise that what we need to take hold of is that one element that gets us out, leaves us out, and then shuts down the debate about future referendums and allows us, therefore, to take the confidence that under a new leadership we can go forward to change the nature of what is in this process. I therefore say to my colleagues, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I say to my colleagues that for me this is not an easy decision, because there is a lot about this bill that I do not like, and I stand on that position. But I do say that if we don't send this forward to look at the legislation, we will rue that day, because we will end up having to accept what I think is a damaging and destructive extension, meaning we will never leave the European Union. And if we say we stand up for 17.4 million people, then we have to get those people what they asked for, is to leave the European Union, and this now is the only way.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what a shambles it has been, and today we see desperate measures by a desperate government. We hear the Cabinet is riven. We know that members of the government party are at loggerheads with each other. And to add insult to injury, we now know that this issue, this important, hugely important constitutional issue, the biggest issue of my lifetime, is now going to be the centre of a Conservative Party leadership contest. And that tells us what we need to know, that this has stopped a long time ago being anything about the referendum in 2016, anything about the British people, and it is everything about the party that purports to be our government today. And we have seen repeated mistakes. First of all, a referendum passed with no rules and no planning. Not even half a dozen civil servants in the basement of the Treasury or the Cabinet Office working out what might have happened if the vote went the way it did. And then the Prime Minister triggering Article 50 in March of 2017 in order to rush in to a process with, again, no plan. And then, recklessly, to call a general election a month later, where she lost even the fig leaf of a majority. And now we see a PM incapable of negotiation over that 2-year period, a government that was secretive. And I chair the Public Accounts Committee, Mr Speaker, and my committee has worked hard, along with other committees, to make sure to try and get information about what was happening in preparing for Brexit. Answer comes there none. I met the late head of the Cabinet Office who said it would damage our negotiation position if the government revealed this information. Information that is flowing around Brussels like no tomorrow. Information that sectors of industry and of the community know about. And I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a powerful and important speech. On the Environmental Audit Committee, just a week ago, we asked the DEFRA Secretary what steps he was taking in the event of a no-deal Brexit to protect British farmers. He said there was a package of funds that would be available, but he couldn't tell us, as MPs, accountable for taxpayers' money, how and how much and where it would be spent. Does she agree with me that that is the most incredible abuse of a government's power, to commit funding to farmers and not to tell MPs about how much is going to be spent?
My honourable friend makes an important point, and my committee has repeatedly said that businesses and people need to know what's happening, and yet government was only advising businesses in October of last year about some of the preparations they would need to make for a no-deal Brexit. And we estimate huge costs, billions of pounds, which I don't have time to go into today, of the costs of business just for preparing for a potential no-deal alone. And we had this unveiling of a deal last November with none of this information, and it would have been easy and sensible and proper government to be talking to sectors about what might happen. And had the government been doing that, it might have been listening to the reality for people on the ground. And yet we are here in this desperate last-ditch attempt by the government to rescue itself and this country from a disaster of its own making. We are being asked to agree the withdrawal agreement with no guarantee about what next. The little certainty that that gives is little comfort, cold comfort for businesses out there. It is a leap of faith that we are being asked to take. But, Mr Speaker, I have no faith in this government to deliver on this or any further stages of Brexit. We're being asked to vote for this withdrawal agreement with no knowledge of what will be in the political agreement. It is a leap into the dark, and I am not prepared to take that leap and put my constituents in that position.
Quite right.
And the Public Accounts Committee has highlighted through 10 reports the problems and challenges and the costs of preparing for no deal. And of course the civil service has had to prepare for no deal and for a deal simultaneously, double the cost. The cost is high in pounds, but it is hugely high in the confidence of this nation. This utter failure. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
For giving way. I had the honour of serving on the Public Accounts with her just when I entered into this House. She's talking about risk. Knowing what she does through the Public Accounts Committee, does she not recognise that the greatest risk is not passing this withdrawal agreement, not having that certainty on data, not having that certainty on customs, not having that certainty for the United Kingdom for their move forward? She is very right. Oh, sorry, the Honourable Lady is right. There's a big discussion to have about the future, but we've got to do this first before we get to that discussion.
Together.
The honourable gentleman served honourably on the Public Accounts Committee, and he was an assiduous member of that committee, and he knows, and I know, that yes, we need certainty, but to jump into the dark, to pass this today without any of that detail is too much of a leap of faith. And my point is very clearly that the government could have been sharing and discussing a lot more. If we remember back to the 2017 general election, the discourse that we were having then was remarkably different to the discourse we are having 2 years later. And it is for that reason that I now think we need to have a deal that goes back to the people, because we are now 3 years on from that original referendum, and people are now seeing that there is no certainty here about what is being proposed. And this lack of certainty is hitting prices in our shops, and our consumers, our constituents are having to pay more for the basics. It's hitting businesses who are stopping me in the street to tell me about the challenges that they are facing as they prepare potentially for no deal. And the cost of preparing for that no deal is very real for them. Every time we speak about this, Mr. Speaker, the exchange rate jumps and there is uncertainty there. It is utter recklessness for a government, Her Majesty's government, to lead the country into this uncertainty. So we need to accept that we do need a longer extension in order to reach both agreement and then make sure we pass the relevant laws on whatever that agreement is. And it has often been quoted today and elsewhere that we should not be rushing into European Union elections. I say don't let the tail wag the dog. If that's what has to happen in order to have a longer extension, then so be it. Understandably, many in this House will feel that is not ideal. And the honourable member for Esher and Walton talks about renegotiation with the European Union. He had the privilege of serving as a Secretary of State. He knows, as I know in the 3 years that I spent negotiating for the last Labour government in Europe, that you can't negotiate the changes that would need to be negotiated in the 2 weeks or even up to the 22nd of May that would need to be negotiated. We rely on working together while we are still members with the other 27 nations in the European Union, and we need to make that change. And we have been very good at this. Our diplomatic skills, the talent of our governments, of successive governments of different colours, have achieved a lot from the European Union. So it's in our power to achieve a lot, but not in 2 weeks.
Before she finishes, can I just a very quick intervention and say, would she agree with me that what is most hurtful, those of us who sit on all benches, who actually heard the voice of the people in the referendum, but are absolutely committed to get a deal that's a decent deal, a good deal for the people in our constituencies. We haven't turned our back on them, we're listening, but we want them to give them a chance to decide if a deal's good enough for them.
I completely agree, but we must, above all, rule out no deal. We have voted on that in this House, and yet it remains a risk, and no responsible government should lead us over the cliff edge and put up fig leaves. I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I certainly don't want to see us crash out with no deal either. I don't support a second referendum, but if we had one, it seems to me only fair that the people should decide on a deal or a no deal or remain. Why?
Well, we can get in. One of the realities, of course, if we were to propose and get a bill for a second referendum, is this House would have to vote on at least 5 separate occasions in order to frame that legislation. So I'm not going to talk about those hypothetical deal situations, but we need no deal to be ruled out. There is consensus here. The government needs to make that absolutely clear. Parliament is coalescing, as the indicative votes process showed, around options, which we will get the chance to vote on Monday and potentially on Wednesday. And yet the government has made no commitment that it will take any notice of that. They are not binding votes, and I hope that we'll get some comfort from the front bench today about how they will react to that. And I'll give way one last time.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. She's making a powerful speech and being very generous. Was she as dismayed as I was to hear the International Trade Secretary on the Today programme this morning saying in terms that he did not support a customs union, which is what this House will be voting on Monday if the deal falls today?
Well, of course, it's up to the government of the day to set out its position, but I would hope that at the point when we are going to be debating this again on Monday and voting as a Parliament on, and only because the government has failed so abysmally, that the government might have the courtesy to have listening ears on and be prepared to hear what Parliament may be willing to support. But, Mr. Speaker, I've said my piece. The government needs to listen, must rule out no deal. We need to make sure we are moving forward. We need a longer extension, and ultimately we will need to go back to the people, because we are now 3 years on from a referendum. Things have moved on. The public are not fools. They can see when things are not working and when this government has let them down. Mr. Speaker, I rest my case.
Sir John Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, I know that numerous MPs, particularly on the Conservative side of the House, are finding this a very difficult vote and a very difficult decision to make. So perhaps I could just briefly explain how I've gone about trying to reach my difficult conclusion on what I must do. And the first thing I ask myself is, what do my voters in Wokingham want me to do? Because where they have a very strong majority for a certain conclusion, I would need an extremely good reason to disagree with them. And it is quite clear from all those who have communicated with me, talked to me, sent me emails, that there is a very big majority in Wokingham against accepting this agreement. It has brought together people who both voted Remain and voted Leave, and they've all come to the same conclusion. They would like a different outcome afterwards, but they come to the same conclusion that this is not an agreement that the United Kingdom should in any circumstances sign up to. The national polling reflects this as well, and that is why it's a matter of interest, I think, to all members in this House, that this agreement has somewhere between 15 and 25% support on a very good day in a favourable poll. So roughly 4 out of 5 people have considered it and think it is a very bad idea, and I would urge all to bear that in mind before they finally cast their vote this afternoon. The second thing I ask myself is, what have I and my party promised my electors in Wokingham and the wider electorate in the United Kingdom that we serve? And there again, it is very clear that I and the National Manifesto in 2017, which then gave me my mandate, said that we would see Brexit through, that it would take 2 years after the formal notification had been received, that no deal was better than a bad deal, that of course we would do our best to get a really good deal, which was our preference. And the manifesto of the National Conservative Party wisely said that the government would negotiate both parts together. Any withdrawal issues would be negotiated in parallel with the future trading arrangement and the future partnership. And how wise that was, because at that point the government and our leader understood that there would be compromises made, and if you were going to make concessions in the withdrawal bit, you wanted the good news in the partnership bit to be nailed down at the same time. And unfortunately, the government changed its mind about that shortly after the general election, and that has let the public down, because it means that we haven't used the purchase of all the concessions the government made in the withdrawal agreement to nail down what is needed, in their view, for the future partnership agreement. And I feel very bad about that. And I have to say to my electors that in order to get closer to what I and the government promised, I have to say no to half of the total agreement when it is so obviously weighted very strongly against the United Kingdom and against our interests. But then I come to the third thing. My electors elected me, and they elected me to exercise my judgment. They expect me to read all the documents and understand the background and study major matters for myself. And on this happy occasion, their view and my view coincide. That I have studied all the documents, I have followed very closely the negotiations, I've offered a great deal of advice to the Prime Minister and her team. Much of it, I'm afraid, has not been taken, and thus we are where we are, as the Attorney General said. But my study of the documents tells me this, that the withdrawal agreement is not leaving the European Union, that were it to pass, it will be followed by an extremely bad piece of legislation which recreates all the powers of the European Union and applies them to us for a period of between 2 and 4 years. We won't even be told for how long, because it's in the gift of the European Union and the negotiations, and that we might end up having to accept a large amount of the rules and the trading arrangements in perpetuity because of the most unfortunate Irish backstop which has been placed in, and because none of us want to break up our country. It would mean the only way we could fulfil the requirements of this solemn treaty would be for the whole United Kingdom to stay in all the arrangements that the EU demanded. And the agreement would mean that for a period of at least 2 years and maybe 4 years, the European Union could negotiate in any way it saw fit over an extremely wide range of issues, not just related to business and trade, and this House of Commons would have no voice and no vote and no right to do anything other than implement it faithfully and fully without us amending it or even complaining through a reputable mechanism. And I don't see how anyone could possibly inflict that upon a great country which has recently voted to be sovereign, to take back control. I do not see how this House could possibly vote for this agreement when it has open-ended financial commitments on an enormous scale. The Treasury has, I think, very optimistically priced them at a pretty big £39 billion. But there are no numbers in the agreement. There is no agreement about the bills that will be set. And there is a mechanism which allows the EU to send us bills under very broad headings, and then with a system of referee to try and deal with disagreements, heavily weighted in favour of the EU, with any legal matter being resolved by the European Court of Justice. Now, who on earth would agree to pay unlimited, unknown bills and not have genuinely independent arbitration over the purpose? And when will the government give us any purpose for offering to pay all this money? Because they are in this absurd position, because of the way they've handled the negotiation, that they've decided to pay the money, but they haven't secured any goods or services in return for it. Now, when I go shopping, I don't put £39 on the counter and say to the shop, that is your money, whatever happens next. Now can we, for the next 21 months, have a discussion about whether you're going to let me have anything in return for my £39? But that, unfortunately, is what we're being asked to approve in this agreement this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. So, in conclusion, for me, it turns out to be an easy decision. I'm sorry for a lot of my right honourable and honourable friends, it is not so easy. I never find it easy to vote against the government I want to support. And in this Parliament, I very rarely voted against the government I want to support. But on this one issue, I have voted against the government before, and I will vote against it again this afternoon, because this is a dreadful agreement. It is a fully binding treaty with no exit clause, something we can't get out of, and there would be requirement after requirement after requirement. We would have subcontracted our legislation to someone we can't control and we have to obey, and we'd offered them to pay them for a lot of money for no obvious good reason.
Thank you. Mr. Hilary Benn.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I will be voting against this motion today, not because I do not believe that we owe the money. I disagree with the right honourable gentleman who has just spoken. Not because I disagree that we need to protect EU and UK citizens, we need a long transition, we need an Irish backstop, but because this motion is a transparent attempt by the government to avoid another meaningful vote in the terms of Section 13(1) of the 2018 European Union Withdrawal Act, for which this House fought long and hard in the summer of 2018. Of course I'll give it.
Would the right honourable gentleman, in making his speech, give an answer as to how, compliant with the Speaker's ruling, he would have brought a vote that fulfilled the conditions he just mentioned?
I will readily give, and I shall come on to that very point later on in my speech. The government could choose, if it wished to seek to change the political declaration with the European Union. And it is the government's consistent failure to do that, because of its consistent failure to reach out across the House, that the government finds itself in the difficulty it has created today. But I shall return to that point a little later on. We cannot, Mr. Speaker, separate the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration, because both parts are essential to the process. It is like saying, right, I am selling the house I'm living in at the moment without having any idea whatsoever where we're going to live afterwards. And indeed, you would not have the withdrawal agreement without the political declaration. Article 52, that's 50(2), refers specifically, and I quote, to setting out the arrangements for its withdrawal, taking account of the framework for its future relationship with the Union. And as my honourable friend, the Shadow Solicitor General, in what I thought was a brilliant speech, quoted the statement of the Prime Minister on the 14th of January. And I'm just going to repeat one small bit of it. She said, one cannot be banked, referring to the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, without the commitments of the other. And yet what this motion before the House today seeks to do is explicitly to try and bank the commitments of one without the commitments of the other. And I do not see how that can in any way be consistent with what the Prime Minister told the House of Commons on the 14th of January. Now, the second reason why I shall vote against it is what are the consequences of passing this motion? Because the aim, and the Attorney General was absolutely frank about it, is to gain an extension to the 22nd of May rather than the 12th of April by satisfying the requirement of Article 1 of the European Council decision of the 22nd of March, which stated, in the event that the withdrawal agreement is approved by the House of Commons by the 29th of March 2019 at the latest, the period provided for in Article 50(3) of the Treaty of the European Union is extended until the 22nd of May 2019. Now, the problem, and my intervention with the Attorney General was trying to address that, is that by the time, if we did pass this motion and got that extension, we get to the week beginning the 20th of May, if at that moment we have not yet resolved the question of our future political and economic relationship, and the UK decided that it needed to apply for a further extension, I would argue that the EU is almost certain to refuse any such extension on the grounds that we have failed to take part in the European elections. And that is because of paragraph 10 of the decision of the European Council, which said, again, and I quote, if the United Kingdom is still a member state on the 23rd to the 26th of May 2019, which we would be if we asked for and were granted an extension beyond the 22nd of May, it will be under the obligation to hold the elections to the European Parliament in accordance with Union law. It is to be noted that the United Kingdom would have to give notice of the poll by 12th of April 2019 in order to hold such elections. Well, since it would be impossible on the 20th of May to give notice to hold elections on the 23rd of May, it would be impossible to comply with this requirement. And therefore, what this motion before the House today means is that if it were carried, it would in effect rule out any possibility of a further extension under Article 50 beyond the 22nd of May. So if at that point we have not reached agreement on the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, then this motion would mean the UK leaving without a deal on the 22nd of May, and the House voted this week by 400 votes to 160 to reject for the third time leaving with no deal. The only other way forward would be to revoke Article 50 to buy ourselves a little bit more time, but the Prime Minister has repeatedly told the House that she would refuse to do so. I will give way.
I'm really grateful to the Right Honourable Member. Doesn't that mean that, in fact, this motion before us should not be called the withdrawal bill proposal, but, in fact, the prevention of the right of the British people to vote in a European election bill?
Well, that would indeed be the consequence if the motion were passed. I'll be perfectly frank with the honourable member. If there were a way round the problem of participation in the European elections, I think many people in the House would seek to find it, but it is quite clear that the European Union, in the form of the Commission and the Council and the legal advice, has said that this is not possible, and therefore, in effect, this is a no-deal motion. It is. And for that reason alone, it deserves to be defeated. Now, my last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. This bill is displacement activity on the part of the government, because the government should be turning its effort and attention to the real issue, which is our future relationship. And I listened Of course I'll give way to the Minister.
I have great respect for the Right Honourable Gentleman, the work he does on the Select Committee, but he just described what we are voting on today as a no-deal motion. What we are voting on today is an agreement. It is an agreement which has been agreed by the UK and the EU, and it is an agreement that his committee will recognise provides vital protections for citizens. I think you should reconsider that argument about a no-deal motion.
No, I reciprocate the respect for the Minister, who is doing a very good job, I have to say, in extremely difficult and trying circumstances. But this is half an agreement. It's half an agreement that is being presented to the House. And I am saying to the government that it should be focusing all of its attention on the real problem on this side of the House, which is the content, or to be more precise, the lack of content, of the political declaration. Very briefly, and then I'm going to...
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful and important speech. Does he agree with me that if the bill, the withdrawal bill, actually ends up getting put through Parliament, it's likely to be highly contentious, not least because it's going to have to reverse the previous EU Withdrawal Act in order to pass?
Well, indeed, and it's always been the case that it would have to, because of the withdrawal agreement, that it was going to have to reverse, in particular,
It's the same session.
Well, this is a very interesting question, but I am being diverted from the final point I wanted to make. I listened to the Attorney General's, I thought, kind reference to the indicative votes process. I almost forgot that the government voted against it happening this week. But if they were taking it seriously, then they would indicate a willingness to compromise if the House is able to find a way forward. And why has the deal been defeated twice? Because it offers no clarity and no certainty for our future. If businesses come to me in my constituency and say, Hillary, I know how it works today, I export. Tell me how it will work with this political declaration in 3, 5, 10 years' time. I have to look them in the eye and tell them the truth. I have absolutely no idea. And therefore, is it right to ask the House to take us out of the European Union on that basis, especially when a new Prime Minister may be coming? Now, on Newsnight last night, it was reported that a Cabinet Minister was asked, why is the government going ahead with this vote? And that Cabinet Minister replied, expletive deleted, I'm past caring, it's like the living dead in here. So that is the problem. I won't comment on the language, but that is the problem. That has always been the problem. No. We have a divided cabinet, we have a divided parliament, we have a divided country. People are feeling very passionate out there. But this vote isn't going to solve the problem. It isn't. Monday's votes might offer us a way forward, and I hope the House is going to seize it.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think there may be one thing which probably unites us all on many sides of the on both sides of the House for most of us, which is the utterly wearing quality of the debate on which we've been engaged for so long. And so, as a consequence, when we find ourselves being presented with an opportunity that might bring that debate to a conclusion, there's always a temptation to look at it and to think that it could be a way out. And that's particularly the case because, of course, for many of us in this House, although I accept not all, the sword of Damocles of a no-deal Brexit hangs over us. And that sword of Damocles is a matter of huge anxiety, because I happen to believe it would be catastrophic for this country. But the issue that we have to the issue that we have to consider today is whether the offer that the Attorney General and the government has made to this House goes any way to resolving this problem. And in my view, it cannot and does not. The origin of the problem lies, has been so rightly said, and here I find myself in agreement with my right honourable friend member Stone and my right honourable friend the member for Wokingham, in the fact that the government set out on an enterprise where it said that at the end this House would be able to vote not only on a withdrawal agreement but upon a future relationship. Indeed, page 39 of the Conservative Party manifesto, because I'm sometimes accused of not following it, it said, we believe it is necessary to agree the terms of our future partnership alongside our withdrawal reaching agreement on both within the 2 years allowed by Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union. And the problems that the government has had started to multiply when it became clear that that was not happening. Whatever the motivation of different members of this House in rejecting the government's deal, the truth is that at its kernel was the fact that we did not have any ability to make that assessment. That's why the government lost twice on Section 13 motions, and in truth, I suspect, even if a Section 13 motion could be brought back, it would again be rejected for the same reasons. Now the Attorney-General and the government say to us that there's a way out of this by which we can agree the withdrawal agreement, get a technical extension, I will come back to that in a moment, to the 22nd of May, and expect in the intervening period to resolve the outstanding issues to the satisfaction of this House. Just in the last week, this current week, this House, finally in its frustration, took control of the order paper because it wanted to debate the alternatives that the government didn't want us to debate. But one thing is quite clear from that debate: the alternatives need time to agree, they need time to work up, and they need time to negotiate with our EU partners. How can that be done in the context of a technical extension that my right honourable friend the Prime Minister stated at the dispatch box would be there if we reached our agreement merely to implement it? At an earlier date, I said to my right honourable friend the Chief Whip, explaining my position, that if we reached agreement in this House, even if I didn't like it, I would not seek to use the passage of the Withdrawal Agreement Act for the purpose of wrecking it. That's a self-denying ordinance on my part. But it's perfectly obvious, I'm afraid I have to say, that some of my honourable friends and other honourable members in this House have an intention to use the Withdrawal Agreement Act to wreck the passage of any agreement. And I have to say, speaking personally, that if I can't vote on a clean motion to approve a deal, I will be constrained on the passage of the EU Withdrawal Act to be much freer in my opposition. The truth is that it is, I think, most unlikely that between now and the 22nd of May we have any possibility of reaching that sort of consensus, which is why I've been of the view for some time that we ought to seek to extend Article 50 further if we couldn't come to an agreement by the 12th of April. And I believe, in just a moment, and I believe that our European Union partners have understood that and would be willing for us to do it. I give way, of course, to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable and learned friend. I don't say this with any sense of rancour. I say it out of frustration and concern for this country. It seems to me that the losers don't know how to lose, and the winners don't know how to win. And that is why we're at this sort of juncture, which almost seems insurmountable for this House to cross.
If I may say to my honourable friend that I greatly respect him, as indeed I respect the views of all my honourable friends on this side of the House, and indeed elsewhere on this matter. Compromise is a very important part of the political process. But compromise happens when people come together to accept an outcome which they are prepared to endorse and respect. And it's manifestly obvious. I only had to listen to one or two of the speeches this morning on this side of the House to see that that is not what is going to happen. There is no compromise, and there's no compromise because there's nothing to compromise on in terms of the future relationship. So there is no settled will. And therefore, this siren song that is being given to us, in which I share his desire to get this over with, but this siren song will just take us further onto the rocks. And what we are going to end up with is a situation in mid-May where we will be scrabbling around with the catastrophe of no-deal Brexit and with no ability to rectify it when currently we are in a position to do so. Some of my honourable friends on this side of the House had great courage in supporting the indicative vote process. and essentially rebelling against the government's position in doing it. I just have to say to them gently that having had the courage to do that, they are now abandoning it completely for something which cannot progress the debate on how we get out of our current impasse. It just will not happen. So for those reasons, however tempting it might be, however much the calls of loyalty are made, and heaven knows I feel them keenly, however much they are made, I'm afraid I cannot vote for something which, in my judgment, is not going to deliver the benefits that are claimed. Furthermore, and here I agree with my right honourable friend, the member for Woking, not for the first and not for the last time, that our constituents, whether they voted leave or voted remain, are being delivered something which is utterly, utterly different. And the vote we take tonight, today, will determine whether we end up in chaos or not. And my judgment is that we should not... of course I give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that if we wanted to avoid chaos, we can vote for the deal? And isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend says he's not willing to compromise, and he says other people are unwilling to compromise, and he bases his own lack of compromise on other people's unwillingness to compromise? If he's willing to compromise, he will find there are many people in this House who are willing to compromise, and that compromise is a withdrawal deal.
I'm always willing to consider compromise, but as I said before, compromise has to come from a settled intention to respect an outcome. And I have to say that there is no such settled intention. Certainly by many members on this side of the House. I mean, I listened to the speech of my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford. It was quite clear from what he said that his purpose will be to use the passage of the WAP to entirely reorder the future relationship in the way he wants. Now, I don't disagree with that. It's his right. But it highlights why separating the two is plainly, in my judgment, impossible. And yet that's what we're being asked to do. Of course I give way to my right.
I hope he's not asserting that it's wrong to want to amend a bill or to debate the bill, but that to get to the bill is of vital importance, and there's nothing sinister, surely, about that.
But the bill was intended to implement the agreement for the future relationship on which we had voted. It has now been transformed into something entirely different. A free-for-all opportunity, as I understand it, although I don't suspect the government really intends that, for MPs to pile in their ideas as to not only the future relationship, but caveats in respect of Brexit, which in my view are incompatible in many cases with the withdrawal obligations themselves. Now, we have to be clear about these things. And here I revert to being an ex-law officer. Of course there will be differences of view in this House, but we have to be honest in our purposes. And I do not intend to sell my constituents short, however tempting it might be for party political advantage. In any case, if ultimately we fail the country, then we as a party are not worth existing. And the national interest in this matter must come first.
Order. After the honourable gentleman, the member for East Antrim, who is the next honourable member to speak in this debate, the time limit on backbench speeches will be reduced to 6 minutes in an attempt to accommodate the maximum number of colleagues. Mr. Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't intend to spend a long time referring to or looking at the political and parliamentary skullduggery and chicanery that we have reached or had to go through to get this motion here today. Sufficient to say that we are breaking the legislation and ignoring the legislation that this House passed in order, on the day that we were meant to be leaving the EU, to comply with a deadline which has been imposed on us by the European Union. And I think there's a certain irony in that. As far as the withdrawal agreement is concerned and the motion before us is concerned, our position has not changed. We have sought
over the last number of weeks, to work with the government to try and find a way of either getting legal assurances or legislative changes which would enable us to move this process on. Because, of course, we want to see a deal, because we want out of the European Union, and we want to have a clear path as to how we do that. But it has not been possible. And it has not been possible, Mr. Speaker, because the withdrawal agreement itself so ties the hands of this government that it is impossible to find a way of securing the kind of assurances which are required to, first of all, make sure that the United Kingdom is not broken up, and secondly, that we do have a clear way of ensuring that the Brexit, which many of us expected to see delivered, will be delivered. And it's our regret that that process has reached an end. In the Alice in Wonderworld land that we are now living in, the Attorney General said today that this is not a meaningful vote. Well, let me say, Mr. Speaker, this is a meaningful vote to many people who want to see the delivery of our exit from the EU. It's meaningful to the people of Northern Ireland, because if this goes through, the people of Northern Ireland will find themselves stuck with a legally binding agreement which keeps Northern Ireland and puts Northern Ireland outside the United Kingdom and could be there forever at the insistence of Brussels. And despite what and I know she was going to intervene, but she's had time and time again, but despite what the Honourable Lady for North Down has said, she tries to cover and dress up her pro-EU prejudice with a justification that this agreement has no implications for the principle of consent. Has no implications for the and I'll give way. Yes.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, but would he accept that there are those of us who consider ourselves to be passionate unionists, who believe passionately in Northern Ireland being a fully fledged member of the United Kingdom, and who don't like this deal at all, and don't like any part of it, but feel on reflection that it is the best way to proceed in the best interests of the United Kingdom?
Can I say to the honourable member, I understand the dilemma which many of my honourable friends on the other side of the chamber are facing on this. But the dilemma for me as a unionist is that I cannot, and we as a party cannot, put our hand to an agreement which would have Northern Ireland treated differently, which could have that difference between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom imposed on us forever by the EU, and which breaches the principle of consent in the Belfast Agreement, because it would change irrevocably the constitutional position of Northern Ireland, where we would have our laws made in Brussels instead of London. And I'll give way, yes.
I thank very much the honourable gentleman giving way. Does he agree with me that having absolutely nothing changed about the backstop since it was first introduced, that the people of Northern Ireland, the pro-union people of Northern Ireland, whatever way they voted, remain or leave, will see anyone who voted today for this agreement today, whether they mean it or not, it will be seen as not supporting the right of people in Northern Ireland to be part of the United Kingdom?
Well, and that's the judgment. That's the judgment which we have made. And for us who have gone through a terrorist campaign of 40 years to try and remove us from the United Kingdom, we are not prepared to see our constitutional position being altered by Brussels in a fit of pique against the United Kingdom for daring to leave the EU. Let me just make a second point here. The second reason why I will be opposing this agreement is because I believe it betrays the wishes of the vast majority of people who voted to leave the EU. And I know that the honourable lady for Edinburgh South, who is not in her place, has described those who voted to leave and who are standing outside today protesting as a mob. And that's the kind of disdain. That's the kind of disdain which those who have voted to leave have been, and they're being treated disdainfully in this particular withdrawal agreement. I'll give way. Yes.
Does my honourable friend also agree that if we vote for this deal tonight or this afternoon, we will be, for the first time in almost 300 years of our constitutional history, be drawing a line between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom? It may only be a trade barrier, but that's how these things start, and that will be under the direct control, in many respects, of the EU.
And of course, whether it's just a line down the Irish Sea, as described by some people, it will have serious implications for the economy of Northern Ireland. We don't even know, and we were told that even when the bill goes through, we'll still not even know the nature of those barriers, not until SIs are presented to this House or ministers use their Henry VIII powers will we know the kind of restrictions that there would be damaging the Northern. No, I'm not going to give way any more of a few minutes remaining. The third reason why I'll be voting against this is because one of the fundamental reasons that we were opposed to this is that it leaves us in a situation where we will be part of the EU without having any say, subject to EU rules during the implementation period and any extension, subject to the European Court of Justice, and only have the ability to break out of it if and when the EU decide they have screwed as much out of us in negotiations as they possibly can. And that is not the kind of agreement that I believe anyone should sign on. There's only one thing, Mr. Speaker, that has changed, and it's this: that the Irish Government and the EU this week have let the cat out of the bag. The premise on which the withdrawal agreement is based, namely that there would be a hard border down between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, and that somehow would give targets for terrorists to hit and would break the peace in Northern Ireland. We have been told that in the event of a no deal, and even in their written preparations, in their legislation, the Irish Government has said that no such thing will happen. We have argued that all along. We have argued that this agreement is based on a contract. And why would we vote today for a contract which breaks up the United Kingdom, which ties us into an arrangement with the EU that we can't get out of without their assent, which is going to be the basis for any future trade relationships that we have with them? Because the EU have made it quite clear the agreement will be the basis of any future relationships. So we go in handcuffed into any negotiations. And I don't believe that that's an agreement which is worth voting for. We voted against it the first time, we voted against it the second time, and we will vote against it this time. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, what the outcome of this vote will be today. But can I assure the House that whatever means there are available to us should this agreement go through, we will continue to oppose it, because we will not allow Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland's economy, and the will of the people of the United Kingdom as a whole to become the plaything in the hands of bureaucrats from Brussels.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, I draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, and it is a great pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Antrim East, who I first met more than 25 years ago when he was the Mayor of Belfast. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak up today for compromise, and I find myself very much drawn to the arguments put by my right honourable friend from Chingford. I was, of course, his whip more than a quarter of a century ago during the Maastricht debates, and today we are in absolute agreement, and I think he spoke extremely well in the cause of compromise. And, Mr. Speaker, I voted against the Prime Minister's deal, in January. I voted against it then because I thought that there was time for the overall deal to be changed in the best interests of those I represent in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield. I voted for it, however, earlier this month because I thought the options and the opportunities have narrowed significantly, and I will be voting for it today. I don't like the deal. I've concluded it's the least worst option. I'm particularly worried about the issue of the backstop, but above all I'm worried about the central point that was made by my right honourable friend for Wokingham, which is that we have gone about this and breached the fundamental rule that was certainly the case when I used to go to ministerial meetings in Brussels, which is that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And it is the failure to endorse that cardinal principle of negotiating with the EU which has let us down so badly. So, Mr. Speaker, the government has found a way to keep themselves compliant with your directions from the Chair, but we're negotiating today, we're discussing and voting today on essentially the government's deal. I will vote for it. If it goes down tonight and the government fails, then this House must accept that we are back fair and square in the process set out by my right honourable friend for West Dorset, which I supported, and where it was no surprise at all, Mr. Speaker, that the House did not make a decision on Wednesday this week and voted no effectively for everything. But next Monday, Mr. Speaker, if the government fails today, then the House must recognise that those votes on Monday are extremely important, and in my judgment it is likely that the House will vote yes to at least two of them. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He's making an important point on that. Was he not also, though, in some way inspired by the process of a couple of days ago, that on Monday we do have an opportunity to actually vote for something where there could be a majority, and in fact just 2 days ago, on 3 options, achieved more votes than actually the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement in 2 previous votes?
Well, he makes an interesting point in his own way, but the point that I am making is that on Monday the House will need to choose. If the government cannot do it, then the House must do it, and we must remember that in spite of some of the things that are said, including from the government bench, the government is accountable to Parliament and not the other way round. And on Monday, as I say, no 2 colleagues agree entirely in what they say in this House, but there will be a result, in my view. I'm so sorry, I haven't got the time to give way. There will be a result on Monday, in my view, and the government must honour that. And I hope very much that the Prime Minister will agree that members of the Cabinet, all ministers, are able to vote in this on Monday. Otherwise, members of Parliament, senior members of Parliament, will be disenfranchised from this process. There should not be a whip. If we come to this on Monday, it is a House of Commons occasion. The House of Commons must seek to sort it out. Now, Mr. Speaker, the final point I want to make is this. I think, for me, I find myself in a minority in the House of Commons. I think the House of Commons overstates the dangers of no deal. I don't believe there is such a thing as no deal. I think were we to leave with what is called no deal, there will be a whole series of smaller deals, some of them temporary, some of them more permanent, and some stops. So myself, I do not worry as much as many of my colleagues do about the dangers of no deal. But equally, I think the House massively underestimates the dangers of advancing towards a second referendum. The anger, irritation and annoyance of our constituents will be palpable, and in my judgment it is very likely, Mr. Speaker, to solve nothing at all. Because imagine the nightmare that the country reversed the earlier vote and voted 48-52 to remain. What would that mean for our democracy? What would that mean for the votes of the people in both those referenda? So I think that to advance, for this House to advance down the route of another referendum would, in my view, be a very serious mistake at all. But it is, however, if the House of Commons the government cannot do a deal that the House of Commons will accept, if the House of Commons cannot come to an agreement in the way that I have described, then it is the ineluctable logic of that position that it will have to be referred again to the British people, and in my view that would be an absolute disaster, Mr. Speaker. So I end on this point, Mr. Speaker. This is an important negotiation, and I think that we have been outmanoeuvred as a country by the European European Commission and by the 27 standing absolutely firm as they said they would, and which many of us did not believe. But this is an important negotiation. They have interests and we have interests. And in my judgment, unless the European Union and the Commission are able to show a little bit more of a sense of compromise to what the government has been saying, then it will leave a profound legacy of bitterness across the channel between the European Union and this country. They are our friends and our partners. We are going to trade with them, do business with them and work with them over the coming years and the coming generations. We have huge security interests as well, which bind us together. And I hope obviously that the government is successful today, but if it is not successful and we move into these further processes and the unknown, the Commission will bear in mind their interests as well in trying to reach a deal that is a good deal for both parties and is not imposed on one of those parties.
Mr. Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to be called in this important debate. And let me just say at the very start, I will do this afternoon what's in the best interests of the country and what's in the best interests of my constituents by not supporting this deal. And I just have to say at the start, I was very disappointed by the leader of the SNP's contribution to this debate. We agree on 95% of everything in this particular EU debate, and to attack the Labour Party perhaps just shows where their thought processes are at the moment, rather than trying to attack the government for the deal that they've got in front of us. Let's not forget, Mr. Speaker, that the House voted for this process against the government's wishes. And one thing we can all say with great certainty is since mid-November last year, nothing has changed. Neither has it changed in this withdrawal agreement, nor has it changed in the political declaration. The only thing that has changed is the Attorney-General's legal advice. And if you ask a lawyer the conclusion that you want and pay that lawyer for that conclusion, you're likely to get the conclusion that you're looking for. There is no trust in this place with the government. We have tried to do everything we can as a Parliament and had to drag the government through hedges to get to a place whereby we can even have this proper debate. And today, of course, I won't give way because it would mean my colleagues in the backbenches won't get a chance to speak. Today is the 29th of March, the day that we should have left the European Union. So it would be a good day to look at the government and the Leave campaign's report card on where we should have been at today's date. So, where is the extra £350 million Brexit bonanza for our NHS? It is not there. Where is the easiest trade deal in history? Not only is it not the easiest trade deal in history, but the government are having to take it out of this particular debate to get their deal through. Where is taking back control, when indeed we are ceding control? Where is the no border on the island of Ireland, when it's the solution can't be found by the government because of the red lines they set themselves? Where are the 40 bilateral trade deals that we would just have rolled over by midnight tonight? Where is the cap and the reduction in net migration? It can't be met. Where is more money